Hi there, Paul J. Bennett here again with another Facebook Live. This week I thought I would talk about some fantasy television shows. Now, once again, I had to qualify this because there are so many shows that would fit into the genre of horror, occult, and so on. So I'm only going to be talking about shows that are more similar to my books in terms of magic, being in a different world, and so on. Before I get too much farther, I have some exciting news. My latest book released today, and here's the cover for it. Morsarian Tales, The Making of a Man, and this is the origin story of Baron Richard Fitzwilliam, who's one of the main characters, of course, in the Heir to the Crown series. So we're very excited about that, and early response has been good. Now, getting into all of these TV shows. This was quite challenging, actually. I had to do a fair bit of research for this, and where possible, I've indicated where you can catch some of these shows if you have some streaming services. And I decided to break it down by the year that it was released. So for shows like Game of Thrones, for example, I'm only going to refer to the first year of its release, just to keep it simple. Otherwise, it'll get way too complicated. So to start off, I'm going to go all the way back to 1955, believe it or not, and we have The Adventures of Robin Hood with Richard Green. Now, these are, technically speaking, not fantasy, but Robin Hood is kind of a fantasy character in a sense. And this is, of course, a really old TV show, black and white. If you have Amazon Prime, they have the episodes available. It's a bit dated in terms of the quality of production. The armor, for example, looks to be knitted chainmail that's been painted silver, probably. But it was originally designed for a smaller screen, so the resolution wasn't as great. I've watched a couple of the Robin Hood episodes. Actually, pretty interesting storylines. So anyway, I'll leave that up to you if you want to check it out and give it a shot. The next one that really sticks out in my mind, we go all the way to 1984, and there's a British production called Robin of Sherwood. This was this is also, by the way, available on Amazon Prime. I believe there were 2 or 3 seasons. Let's see. This Robin Hood show suffered the same fate as another Robin Hood I'll talk about later. It went 2 seasons, and then the main actor left, and they had to come up with a 3rd season replacing the main character of Robin Hood. But they handled it fairly well. It was originally starring Michael Praed, and then he was replaced by Jason Connery, who's the son of Sean Connery, of course, which most people are familiar with. The interesting thing about this is this series is a lot more sort of magical elements, and Robin is chosen by sort of a mythical character named Herne the Hunter. So it's a very, very interesting take on things. It is a bit dated. It's obviously not widescreen for modern TVs, so you're going to see it on a reduced picture. I found it to be quite interesting, a little, I would say, slower compared to the newer shows because the editing back in those days wasn't as fast-paced and so on. Still, I found it very enjoyable. From 1984, we're going to move forward to 1995, probably 2 of the best-known fantasy series ever. We have Hercules, The Legendary Journeys with Kevin Sorbo, and, of course, Xena, Warrior Princess with Lucy Lawless, which, of course, actually started as a spin-off from Hercules. Lucy Lawless actually portrayed 2 different roles on the Hercules show, one of them as Xena, and then she took off with her own show. And I think Xena might even have been more popular than Hercules was. Still a very interesting show, very entertaining. It doesn't take itself seriously, which you'll see in a couple of these other shows that I'll mention as well. And it's kind of a tongue-in-cheek, you know. They had ongoing jokes within the story. Hercules had a story that was essentially Jack and the Beanstalk. Xena had an all-singing, all-dancing episode. If you like your entertainment light, very entertaining. And I think what made those 2 shows very popular was the stars. Kevin Sorbo, Lucy Lawless, both really sort of captured the essence of those roles. Later on, we'll talk about some other shows that weren't quite as successfully cast, and there'll be some surprises to talk about as well. Moving on to 1997. Here's a show you may not have heard about. It was called Roar. It actually dealt with the 4th century in Ireland, and believe it or not, it stars Heath Ledger before he was a really big star. They only aired 8 episodes of the show, and then eventually there were apparently 5 other episodes. They didn't see the light of day until 2000, which is a pity. It never really got the ratings, but it certainly had an interesting start. I've only seen an episode or 2 of this show, but it captured my interest. But back then it was hard to find it, and I haven't looked it up since, so I don't know if that's still available or not. Now, I mentioned Hercules and Xena being a big hit because of the main characters. In 2000, there's another series that came out, went for 2 seasons, called Dark Knight. This is also produced in New Zealand, which of course is the same place they produce Hercules and Xena. And this is not the Batman movies by any means. It's actually based on the stories of the old stories of Ivanhoe. The main character, in fact, is Ivanhoe, and he's accompanied by Rebecca, who, unlike Ivanhoe, where she's a healer of the Jewish faith, in this one she's more of a mystical magic-using type person. It went for 2 seasons. I've only seen 1 of these. I have to tell you that the CGI in this thing, the computer animation, is very dated. If you can get past that, you may find it interesting. I found it was just lacking something that Xena and Hercules had in terms of the sort of the lighter element of the plot. But still one worth checking out. Now, we go to 2006, and now we get into another production of Robin Hood. This one was produced by the BBC. It starred originally Jonas Armstrong and Lucy Griffiths in the role of Maid Marian. Scroll up here on my notes. This one had a total of 3 seasons. Now, in England, they don't call them seasons, they call them series. And each series is generally fewer episodes than we would see in North America. But this had the same problem that the other Robin Hood did, because after the 2nd season, they suffered because the 2 main actors left the show. So both Robin and Marian left. Well, how do you do Robin Hood without Robin Hood? And of course, Maid Marian is a big part of that. Well, they struggled through another season, and then it was ended. However, don't feel too upset, because in 2008 we get a couple of really good shows. The first of these, one of my favorites, is Merlin. Now, I'm not talking about the mini-series Merlin. I'm talking about an actual TV show with Colin Morgan played the part of Merlin, and he starts out, he's more of an apprentice to a healer, and he's friends with Arthur, who's a young adult. He's not yet king. He's the prince, if you like. Very well done, very entertaining, one of my favorite series, and it's got a very interesting ending. I won't spoil it to you, but I really liked the way they wrapped up the series. I thought it was very well done. That same year saw another one of my favorite shows, Legend of the Seeker. This had Craig Horner, Bridget Regan, based on the Sword of Truth books by Terry Goodkind. Different from the books. I haven't read the books, I'll admit that now. I like the series. A lot of people, you either like or dislike his books. I found the series to be entertaining. It was a different spin. It has some decent effects. Now, I haven't seen it for a couple of years, so my memory may be tempered. But I found it quite an interesting show, and I think you would like watching that as well. Moving up to 2011, we have the big one that everyone's going to know, of course, Game of Thrones started. Now, I have to admit, I liked Game of Thrones. I was not a big fan of the books just because there were so many characters to keep track of. I think, I could probably go back and read the books now, and because I could picture the actors in the roles, I might have a better chance of remembering who's who. Still, epic series on an epic scale with an epic budget, which really shines through. Now, they did kind of go overboard on the nudity, the violence, and they're, I'm not saying it's a perfect show. There's a lot of controversy over the way they ended it. But in terms of pure fantasy, it's a good show. I enjoyed it. That same year, we have another show that was called Camelot. Now, this one had a number of people in it, but the main character of Merlin was Joseph Fiennes, and Morgana was played by Eva Green, who's a fairly well-known actress, of course. They only produced one season. What's interesting about this is the showrunner for that show was a man named Chris Chibnall, who became famous for producing Broadchurch with David Tennant, the English version, and also the new Doctor Who with Jodie Whittaker. So he's got a bit of clout there for the geeks amongst us here. So that was not as good as Merlin, I didn't think, but still reasonably good, entertaining. The very, very sort of different take on the Merlin and Arthur kind of relationships and so on, but still fantasy, entertaining from that perspective. Now, there seems to be a bit of a drought in there. Now, bear in mind that in between these years, you did have lots of shows that would cover off witches, vampires, werewolves, take your pick, many of those sort of subcategories. But in terms of fantasy, it was a bit of a drought till 2016 or so. Then we have the Shannara Chronicles, based on the Terry Brooks books. Now, the actual TV show was developed for MTV, and the second season aired on Spike TV. And it was actually based on the novel Elfstones of Shannara. So if you're familiar with Terry Brooks, you might like this. It was filmed in New Zealand. Apparently, that's the place to go for fantasy these days, except for Game of Thrones, of course. So we have that. Now, moving on to 2019. Uh-oh. There we go. Something wasn't scrolling there for me. 3 more shows I want to mention here, and I may have missed some in the middle here, but 3 that really stand out, or that I've heard of. First one of these I'm going to talk about is available through Amazon. It's called Carnival Row. I've only managed to see 1 episode so far. There's too many other shows to keep up on everything. Very interesting take. It's a world with sort of the fae folk, fairies, and so on. And it's got a sort of a steampunk vibe to it. So it's a very sort of a dark and gritty. It's got Orlando Bloom, Cara Delevingne in it. So far, so good. I'll have to get back to watching it when I have time, in amongst writing all these books and watching lots of other things. Another series that debuted, I haven't had a chance to see this one yet, but it looks very interesting. His Dark Materials. Now, you may remember a movie that came out a couple of years ago called The Golden Compass. That's from the same set of books. So I've only seen clips of this one. It looks interesting. It's based on the books by Philip Pullman. I can't give you feedback on it yet. What I've read online looks favorable, so we'll have to see. The last one I got to talk about, I've just finished binge watching this over the holidays. It's The Witcher. What can I say about this? Love the movie, or pardon me, love the series. It tells the story in a non-linear manner, though, which takes a little bit of getting used to. So we're flipping scenes between what goes on with different characters. There's essentially 3 main plot lines developing at the same time, but they're not all happening at the same time. So it's a little disconcerting at first, but the payoff comes in the end. Very entertaining movie. It's got some humor. It's based on, of course, a series of books and also the video game, which you may be more familiar with. So very entertaining, and that's on Netflix, and they've already begun production on the next season, which is due to air, I believe I saw it in November. So actually, very, very soon, relatively speaking. We don't have to wait a year. So that's about it for now. If you come up with other series that you can think of that I maybe missed, feel free to drop me a line on Facebook. Once again, I purposely left out many other interesting stories that could fit into fantasy. Things like Stranger Things, the Sabrina movie, the new series, and so on. But I would sort of, they're not really high fantasy. There's nothing wrong with them, and some of them are quite good, but I had to narrow down the list somewhat, or I'd be talking for hours. So that's pretty much it. The next Facebook Live will be in 2 weeks on 13th of January. And at the moment, I'm planning to talk about some of my favorite historical movies and or TV shows. Not necessarily fantasy related, but certainly movies that I enjoy. Some of them theatrically released, some released or available through things like Netflix or Amazon Prime, or so on. Of course, some of that will depend on what country you're in as to where it's going to be available. We're also have some new equipment coming in, so the sound quality should be better in our next Facebook Live, and our lighting. Right now, we're just dealing with the lights up on the ceiling, not the best arrangement, so we're taking some steps to make things a little bit easier to hear. Some of the audio comes out a little tinny, so we're hoping to improve that. Oh yeah, we're also going to be start using a lapel mic to help with the sound quality. So that's it for now. We look forward to seeing you next week, and in the meantime, 2 weeks, not 1 week, 2 weeks, January 13th at 5:30 Eastern Time. See you then.